Right now, 10 million people are sitting in the dark on the largest island in the Caribbean. The national power grid has collapsed across the whole country. Not once, but for the 8th time since last October. In much of Havana, the electricity is gone 18 hours a day, sometimes more. The average gets worker here earns about $15 a month. In the state pharmacies, only 3 in every 100 people can find the medicine they came for. Nearly a quarter of the population has left the island in just 4 years. The kind of number you normally only see in a war. And here is the strangest mamacita part. In a country where people cannot even spend their own money, a stranger will still wave you into their home and share the little they have. This is Cuba in 2026. And the reality is harder than any headline. First, let me place you. Cuba is the largest island in the Caribbean. A long, narrow strip of land that runs about 750 miles from end to end, but is only 60 miles wide in most places. Its capital is Havana. Around 10 million people live here. And this matters because Cuba was once one of the most prosperous corners of Latin America. A place of grand avenues and money and light. Today, the light is the first thing you notice is missing. In July of 2026, the national grid collapsed completely and left roughly 10 million people without power at the same time. It was the 8th full collapse since October of the year before. This is not a storm knocking out a few streets. It is the entire electrical backbone of a nation going quiet at once. On an ordinary day, large parts of Havana lose power for 18 hours or more because the aging power plants cannot meet even half of what the country needs. Why? Part of the answer is old machines running on fuel that keeps running out. In March, one grid failure lasted 29 hours and 29 minutes, triggered by a boiler leak at a single plant in Remittances. One boiler, a whole country in the dark. And the darkness reaches into everything. Schools close when the power fails. After sunset, whole neighborhoods dissolve into black, and the only lights moving are the headlights of passing Ration cars. People learn to plan their lives around the hours the electricity might return. So, before we go further, I want to know something. Where in the world are you watching this from? Drop your city or your country in the comments. We would genuinely love to see how far across the planet this story has reached. The darkness has a cause, and the cause has a name: fuel. Cuba does not have enough of it, and the shortage reaches everywhere. When there is no fuel, the power plants cannot run. The cars cannot move, and even the cart that carry food and water sit idle. For years, much of Cuba's fuel came from Venezuela, a lifeline of cheap oil flowing across the sea. That flow has been cut back sharply, and on top of it, tightened United States sanctions on the island's energy sector have squeezed the supply even further. At the peak of demand in 2025, the country was short by more than 1,300 megawatts of power, sometimes closer to 1,700. Numbers like that are hard to feel. So picture it this way. It is the difference between a hospital with working lights and a hospital operating by flashlight. On the street, the shortage looks like waiting. Gas stations shut their doors. Drivers line up for hours, not knowing if the pumps will open. One taxi driver put it plainly to a visitor, "There is no gas. There is no ride-hailing app here, no Uber to call." When the buses stop, people stand at the roadside and wait for a stranger to slow down, even late at night. But no power and no fuel are only the surface. What comes next reaches all the way to the dinner table. And if you think a story like this deserves to be seen by more people, tap the hype button below. Each hype only lasts a few seconds, but it helps push this video out to a wider audience. We would be grateful. For 60 years, Cuba has fed its people through a small booklet called the Libreta, a ration book that gives each household a monthly quota of rice, sugar, beans, and a few other basics at a subsidized price. For a long time, it worked. It was part of a point of national pride. Now the booklet is thinner every year. The government itself has admitted it can no longer guarantee the basic basket. Not the milk, not the eggs, not the sugar, not the coffee. Deliveries arrive late or not at all. As one worker behind a ration counter put it, no Cuban can survive on the ration book anymore. To understand how tight things have become, picture what the ration book used to cover: rice, sugar, beans, cooking oil, a little coffee. Enough month to month to keep a family fed. Now, those same quotas arrive shrunken and delayed, and the government has begun cutting the subsidies that made them affordable in the first place, which for many people means the prices only climb. A single mother earning a cleaner's wage, already stretched to nothing, suddenly finds the safety net thinner than the month before. So, people improvise and they go without. A traveler who visited last year described something that stayed with him. He was standing at a resort, a place of plenty for tourists, when a lifeguard quietly asked if he could sneak him a sandwich. Not money, a sandwich. That is what hunger looks like when it becomes ordinary. You cannot understand a place by its shortages alone, though. To see how far Cuba has fallen, you have to look up at the buildings themselves. Look closely at the buildings behind those ration lines, and you see a second story written in stone. Havana was once one of the richest, most beautiful cities in the Americas. Grand facades, columns, balconies. Today, block after block stands cracked, hollowed out, abandoned. One resident, filmed in his home of more than 50 years, was being forced to leave. The building was slowly disintegrating around him. A glorious city quietly dissolving one wall at a time. And the decay is not only in the walls, it is in the water and the waste. Havana's pipes are so old and neglected that the city loses between 40 and 50% of the water it pumps, and in some places as much as 70% to leaks in the ground. More than 3 million Cubans, nearly a third of the population, are hit by water shortages. By early last year, over 600,000 people were getting their water delivered by truck. Then there is the garbage. With no fuel and no spare parts, the trucks that once collected it sit broken and trash piles up on corners and in alleys for months at a time. When a building finally collapses, some families lose everything. A few have ended up living in a gym or in a garage. No walls of their own, no privacy, just a mattress and whatever they could carry out. Hold that image of a once glorious city in your mind, because soon we are going to ask who brought it to this. In a city with almost no fuel and no modern transit, how does anyone actually get anywhere? The answer is a patchwork held together by ingenuity. The backbone is the máquina, also called the almendron. Usually one of those old American cars from the 50s running fixed routes like a shared bus. You flag it down, name your stop, and climb out when you arrive. A ride costs only pesos 15 for a short hop, 30 to 50 for a longer one. Less than $1 at the street exchange rate. Around the máquinas moves everything else people can keep running. Scooters, bici-taxis, which are bicycles rebuilt as taxis, motorbikes left over from the Soviet era, still coughing along decades after the country that made them disappeared. There is a certain genius to it and a certain sadness. A whole city improvising its way from one street to the next, because the ordinary systems the rest of us never think about are not there at all. And this is the pattern that repeats everywhere in Cuban life. When the state cannot provide, people build a workaround out of whatever is at hand. A car becomes a bus. A bicycle becomes a taxi. A neighbor becomes a lift home. But whatever you ride, everyone hits the same wall the moment they reach for their wallet. Here is one of the strangest things about life in Cuba today. People are paid in Cuban pesos, but more and more they cannot or buy what they need with them. Whole stores now sell only in United States dollars. If you do not have foreign currency or family sending money from abroad, you are shut out of the basics entirely. The peso itself is in free fall. On the informal market, a single dollar traded for around 400 pesos by the middle of last year and climbed higher after that. Nowhere is this clearer than on one ordinary street corner. On one side stands a state ration shop and an older store priced in the local virtual currency. Shelves nearly bare, lights dim. One that reporters said smelled of spoiled food from freezers that had thawed. Directly across from it, a new supermarket that takes only dollars. Brightly lit, stocked with imported brands, carts piled high. A person paid in pesos stands at the glass, looking at everything they cannot buy. By the middle of last year, at least $85-only stores were operating on the island, most of them in Havana, with 50 more announced within a month. This is what economists mean when they talk about a dollarized economy. It splits a country in two. The people who have access to hard currency and the people who do not. Two Cubans can do the exact same job, earn the exact same pesos, and live in completely different worlds depending on whether a relative in Miami sends them dollars. The state has even lost control of this flow of money and is now trying by force to claw it back. Even staying connected is a luxury here. A mobile data plan from the state telecom runs from about $7 for a small bundle to $30 for a larger one. Impossible numbers when the average wage is $15 to $30 a month. The internet, like the full supermarket, sits behind glass for most people. When even money loses its meaning, the most basic thing becomes the hardest to reach, a single pill. For decades, Cuba's healthcare was the thing the country pointed to with pride. Free doctors, more physicians per person than almost anywhere on Earth. That pride is now under enormous strain. According to a report from late last year, only about 3 in 100 people could find the medicine they needed in state pharmacies. And hospitals were missing more than 2/3 of the medications their patients required. The blackouts reach into the operating room too. When the power fails for up to 20 hours a day, the X-ray machines, the ultrasounds, the scanners often do not work at all. Surgeries are postponed unless they are emergencies. Ambulances struggle to find the fuel to answer a call. The strain shows in the hardest numbers of all. Infant deaths rose to more than 8 per 1,000 births. In the first half of last year, one of the worst rates in a generation. Who is to blame for this? Cuban officials point to the United States sanctions. Washington points back at the way the island is run. We will come back to that argument. It is the heart of this whole story. For now, hold on to one human fact. Many of the doctors and nurses themselves have joined the largest wave of people leaving the country in its history, which raises a question I want to put to you directly. If it were you, would you stay in the place where you were born or leave to find a future in a new land? Tell me honestly in the comments. For all the collapse, Cubans do not sit and wait for the lights to come back. They fix, they adapt, they build. On one rooftop, a man climbs up every single day to drain the standing water off the top floor just to keep the roof from caving in on the home below. That is the daily arithmetic of survival here. Small, stubborn acts that hold a life together. And when the tin grid failed, help arrived from unexpected places. Vietnam donated 4 solar parks, around 80 megawatts of power for one Cuban province. China shipped roughly 5,000 solar systems. Canada is installing hundreds more for isolated homes. The effect has been real. The share of Cuba's electricity coming from renewable sources jumped from about 4% at the start of last year to 17% by the end of it. For many families, a few rooftop panels now mean the difference between darkness and a working phone. Nowhere is that stubborn ingenuity more visible than in the machines that have somehow survived for 70 years. The bright American cars from the 1950s rolling through Havana are the image most people carry of the country. But the reason they are still here is not romance. It is history. After the revolution, the importing of American cars and parts was cut off and the country's fleet froze in place. Around 60,000 of these classics still run, roughly half of them from the 50s. Keeping them alive takes remarkable hands. With no original bore parts for sale, mechanics drop in diesel engines pulled from boats or industrial machines and hammer out replacement pieces by hand. A car older than most nations, independence still on the road because someone refused to let it die. There is something almost poetic in it. Before the embargo, Cuba was one of the biggest importers of American cars in the world. The streets of Havana once gleamed with the newest models rolling off the line. When the trade froze, those same cars had nowhere to go but forward, year after year, kept alive by hand. What began as a punishment became, over 60 years, a strange kind of monument, a whole era of a country still driving. And the best kept of them now earn their keep, ferrying tourists through old Havana, one of the few reliable ways left to bring in hard currency. But the thing that actually keeps many Cuban families alive is not a car at all. It is an envelope sent from abroad. For countless households, the difference between getting by and going hungry is money wired in from relatives overseas. Cuba receives somewhere between $2 and $3 billion a year in remittances. And if you count goods sent home, the figure climbs much higher. That flow has fallen by around 70% from its peak of roughly $3.7 billion back in 2019. More than 9 in 10 of the people sending it live in the United States. Canadians, Americans, and others who are allowed to visit have made a quiet habit of it. Packing an extra bag full of medicine, over-the-counter basics, and toiletries to hand out when they arrive. One traveler said he brings around $300 of goods each trip and gives it to hotel workers for their families. Another described giving cold medicine to a mother for her baby and watching her break down in tears over something so small. That is the shape of survival here. A stranger's spare bag standing in for a broken system. But for millions, even that lifeline is not enough. So, they make the final choice. They leave. This is the number that stops you cold. Since 2021, well over 1 million people have left Cuba. By some estimates, the country has lost close to 1/4 of its population in just 4 years. That is the kind of loss you normally only see in wartime. Official figures put the population at around 9.7 million, though independent studies suggest the real total may be closer to 8.5. And those who remain are on average older every year. The ones who leave carry their whole lives out the door. Many now settle in Brazil, in Spain, across Latin America, and record videos comparing their lives before and after. A quiet, growing archive of people describing what they left behind. Each one is a small accounting of the same decision made over and over by hundreds of thousands of people. Stay and endure, or go and start again as a stranger somewhere else. And when a country loses this many of its people this quickly, it does not just lose workers. It loses grandchildren, never born, classrooms half empty, whole futures that will now unfold on some other shore. Which leaves one question hanging over every emptying street. What exactly brought Cuba to this? Here is where the story splits in two, and where honest people disagree. The first answer points outward. According to Cuban officials, and to most of the world's governments, the United States embargo has done enormous economic damage, cutting the island off from financing, fuel, and trade. In July of last year, the United Nations General Assembly voted 136-9, calling on the United States to end the embargo. By Cuba's own accounting, the cumulative cost runs into the tens of billions of dollars. The second answer points inward. According to the United States and to many economists, the deepest problems come from how the island itself is governed. Studies of the sanctions find something careful and important, that while they do cause real harm, they do not explain the whole of Cuba's collapse. There is another thread here, too. Human rights organizations note that Cuba's internet is entirely state-controlled and that during the large protests of July 2021, organized largely online, the authorities cut the connection for hours and blocked sites that criticized the government. You can watch these two answers collide in the comment section of almost any video about Cuba. Blame the big neighbor, says one. The blockade is an excuse. It is the government, says another. Both voices are loud, and both hold a piece of something true. I am not going to tell you which one is right. That is not my job. But whatever the cause, there is one thing the numbers cannot explain. How, in the middle of all this, the people here stayed kind. If you speak to travelers who have been to Cuba, they almost never lead with the ruins. They lead with the people. The most common thing they say is some version of this. Great people in a decaying country, and they deserve better. Visitors describe being welcomed like family by strangers who have almost nothing, and being handed a share of the little that is there. And they still smile. That, more than any statistic, tells you who these people are. Think about what that actually takes. To lose your power, your food, the value of your money, your neighbors to emigration, and still greet a stranger with warmth rather than resentment. It would be easy to turn bitter. Many people in far less do. The fact that so many Cubans have not is its own kind of quiet defiance, and it is the thing visitors remember long after the blackouts and the crumbling walls have faded from memory. You see it in the small moments. A stranger slowing down to give a ride in the dark. Neighbors who watch out for one another because there is no space and no privacy and no luxury, only each other. One visitor called it a kind of beautiful poverty, poor in things, rich in the way they hold their community together. There is a phrase people who have been there keep repeating, that they left Cuba, but Cuba never quite left them. It stays with you, they say, precisely because of the people. And that is the part worth sitting with. A society this stripped of comfort could easily turn hard. Every person for themselves. This one, by most accounts, did the opposite. It is easy to pity a place like this. It is much harder and much more honest to respect it. You see that same stubborn life most clearly in the ones who are still young. 14. Children, students, and the ones with the most to lose. Even now, the children of Havana still play in the streets, laughing, chasing each other past the cracked walls, as if the crisis were just weather to be waited out. The has not stopped either. The live bands and the salsa still spill out of doorways, and visitors leave impressed less by the sights than by the warmth. But there is a bittersweet turn in this generation. Cuba has long been proud of its schools and its high literacy, and yet it is precisely the young and the educated, the doctors, the engineers, the teachers, the tech workers, who are leaving in the greatest numbers. Between 2021 and 2025, around 850,000 people emigrated, and more than half were young, most of them university graduates. Most young professionals now say they see no future if they stay. The country's birth rate has fallen to 1.29 children per woman, the lowest in its recorded history. A nation that spent decades teaching its children, now watching them leave. That is the quietest loss of all. If this video has given you a different view of Cuba and moved you with the warmth of its people, take a second to like and subscribe, and come with us to discover more countries. We would be grateful. So where does a country go from here? Honestly, no one knows, and the experts are not optimistic. They describe a situation that is growing more dire, not less. The solar panels and the foreign aid help, but they are not yet at the scale a whole nation needs. A rooftop can power a phone. It cannot rebuild a grid or refill a pharmacy or bring back the young doctors who have already gone. Cuba's future hangs between two forces it does not fully control: the pressure from outside and the choices made inside. The aging population and the endless outflow of the young raise hard questions about the decade ahead. And yet, if you have watched this far, you have seen the one asset no ledger can measure. A people who endure, who share, who keep their dignity when almost everything else has been stripped away. Many who visit come away believing this country deserves far better than the hand it has been dealt. Cuba today is a study in contrast. A nation short on electricity, on fuel, on food, on medicine, on its own currency. And yet, full of people who refuse to stop being generous. The lights may be out across much of the island, but the people somehow are still the brightest thing in it. And that leaves the rest of us with a quiet question. When we imagine everything we think we need, how much of what actually holds a life together is not on the list at all?